Welcome to 4C Radio. We are broadcasting from the central campus of Christ University, Bengaluru. 4C Radio is brought to you by the Department of Media Studies, Christ University. For all those who are looking for a platform that focuses on communities, commons, climate, and communication, this is the place to be. What's more, the station is run by a diverse community of students and dedicated faculty members. Tune in to experience hard hitting interviews, fact checks and myth busting, on ground stories, campus news, and more. We spend a lot of time talking about the future of our planet. We look at graphs, we debate policy, and we treat climate change like a looming deadline. But what happens when you step into a landscape that doesn't operate on human time? In the heart of Karnataka's Western Ghats lies Katlekan, or the Dark Forest. It isn't just a woodland, it is a remnant of Gondwana, an ancient swamp that has survived continental drifts and volcanic upheavals, only to face its greatest threat yet us. Today, our student journalist Shovanghi Biswas will take you deep into the Sharavati Basin. We are joining a group of scholars and ecologists to explore the Myristica swamps who tell us a story older than the Himalayas. As modern engineering and hydropower demands loom over this prehistoric sanctuary, activists and experts express caution and worry.
At 4C, we talk about climate change often in classrooms, open forums, and conversations. But last week, we stepped into something older and deeper than just words, than just spaces of debate. Deep in the Sharavati Basin, in the heartland of Karnataka's Shivamogga, stands a Myristica swamp forest with flowering plants dating 145 million years, a living remnant of the prehistoric Gondwana land and one of India's oldest ecological landscapes. Today, this ancient system, sat in the Western Ghats, is under growing pressure from hydropower expansion, and we travel there to understand what's really at stake. Students of climate studies took a day long trip through the lush green mangroves of Myristica, known in the native Kannada as Katlekan or the dark forest. The swamps are home to around 800 plus endemic species of flora and fauna. The canopy of the forest is so dense that sunlight barely touches the ground. The soil is permanently saturated and trees push their roots upward to breathe. This ecosystem traces a lineage back nearly 145 million years. The Myristica trees, which gives the forest its name, is a wild nutmeg plant. It bleeds a deep, rusty sap when cut, a reminder that this forest belongs to an ancient botanical history. Magnolia trees bloom with tiny flowers. Frogs and crabs move through the forest bed. Among them stands Semicarpus catlecanisis, a critically endangered species found nowhere else on Earth. We spoke to Dr. M.D. Subhas Chandran, a renowned ecologist at the Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore, about the history of the swamps. He accompanied the class to the field visit and provided us with enlightening insights.
There are old fossils of Myristica plant parts available, especially in the Rakan areas and all that. Now, this situation continued, and around 3000 years ago, there was the introduction of agriculture in the Western Ghats. For the first time, agriculture is stepped into the Western Ghats. The new Stone Age was ending, and the Iron Axe and all that. Early agriculture is started clearing part of rainforests of the Western Ghats for initially shifting cultivation. But they did not clear all forests. They cleared forests in small patches. And then permanent agriculture was started a little later in narrow valleys, which were planted with rice, and also on the slopes, the spice gardens were raised with arecanut, pepper, cardamom, such species, and the spices had enormous demand in the Western world and China. And so these valuable spice gardens were created in the narrow valleys, and many of them at the expense of myristica swamps. So a lot of swamps started perishing and due to agricultural intervention. At the same time, the early agriculturists had their gods resident in the primeval forest patches, which they had preserved with respect, with adoration, because the gods of the villages were in such sacred forests. These sacred forests in Uttara Kannada and Shimoga district, they are called Kan forests. So the Kans are different from ordinary forests or kadu or jungle, from where people could cut timber or firewood or collect leaf manure like that. But in the sacred forest, only NTFP, non-timber forest produce, could be collected, like cinnamon bark or like palm toddy, and then for preparing palm sugar, palm starch, medicinal plants.
The Sharavati river basin surrounding the forest exists on a time scale that runs deeper than anthropocentric history. It is older than the Ganga, older than the Himalayas. The Western Ghats carry geological signatures that mirror landscapes in Madagascar in formations 88 million years old. According to Subhash Chandran, even the Great Palghat Gap has a twin formation across the island, where the land broke away into two. Through it all, Katlekan endured. This endurance is now being tested by urban development. The Linganamaki Dam, one of Karnataka's largest hydroelectric systems, has transformed Sharavati into a managed reservoir network. Smaller tributaries like the Aghanashini are being diverted to reduce inland water scarcity. This has caused water flow to reduce in the Sharavati. The river has receded by kilometers.
When the first hydroelectric project, Linganmaki Dam, was commissioned in the Sharavati River in the early 1960s, due to continuous generation of electricity from several generators, the freshwater that was stored had been released into the river, and the gushing of freshwater throughout the year, even in the dry summer months, created low salinity in the estuary, in the river mouth. So, because of the dam, many high salinity and medium salinity adapted fishes, especially the juveniles of fishes, of marine fishes, they vanished. So, when Aghanashni river, which is without any dam in Kumta Taluk, has almost 80 finfishes living, because you find a lot of gradients of salinity from very low to very high towards the river mouth. In the Sharavati river, whether summer or rainy season, throughout freshwater has been gushing out from the upstream power projects, and therefore the salinity regime underwent drastic changes towards lower salinity, and almost 30-35 species of fishes live there, not 80 as in Aghanashni River without any hydroelectric project. So this is one major impact in the estuarine ecosystem of Sharavati River. Further, many free-flowing tributaries of Sharavati have endemic and rare fishes. But when they reach the reservoir in the stagnant water of Lingarmaki, they are not suitable for many swift water fishes.
We spoke to Maximilian Martin and Dr. Padma Kumar, professors associated with the Center for Landscapes, Wildlife and Marine Ecology, or CLIME, and the Center for Peace Praxis, on the need for students to be exposed to the ground reality of climate change.
When I took my students to these ancient freshwater ecosystems of the Western Ghats, I wanted to shake them up a little. There are plants, animals, whole sacred forests. There are people, local cultures, beliefs. So it's a totally interconnected, closely interwoven system that works, that lives. In the Sharavati Basin, you see forests cut, shaped, and nurtured over thousands of years. The river diverted and dammed. You see lives and livelihoods that go in line with the flow of the river and the disruptions therein. Climate there is no longer a set of figures, models, and flowcharts. It's a lived reality. You can teach feedback loops on a blackboard or a digital board. Then you can stand in a river basin and watch how they unfold also. In places like a Western Ghats swamp, you understand time differently. There are relic systems. They have survived monsoons, empires, development plans, catastrophes. You begin to see climate not just as a set of readings, but as memories stored in soil and water. Climate education becomes real with mud on your shoes, raindrops on your hair, and dewdrops on your skin. Fieldwork also builds humility. It teaches you to stay quiet and listen. Listen to people, nature, and silence.
First, about what kind of hope did I have with regard to visiting Myristica swamps and the Sharavati River basin? These Myristica swamps are part of the old world forest structures. This is something that can be dated back to the times when, let's say, India was connected with Madagascar, when Asia and Africa were undivided and all that. So it is that old, even before Himalayas came into existence. Now, that kind of an old forest system is also an indicator of how well our climate regulation is happening. And it's also a great place to study biodiversity of a very different kind. It supports a lot of reptiles and amphibians and different kind of flora and all that. So in the Myristica swamps, we find trees whose roots are above the soil. Of course, some of us might be familiar with the mangrove forest, but here it is of a very different kind. You have stilted roots, you have roots which have almost a U-like shape, and they breathe by coming out of the soil. And that's how the roots have access to oxygen. So it's a very different forest system. The second reason is there is this concept called plant blindness. We are trained to acknowledge beings that are moving in front of us. Trees are unfortunately considered to be not moving, I'm assumed to be not moving, and that as though they're very passive, whereas animals, and especially the fast moving ones, are considered to be more connect worthy, relatable, all that. Trees have their own conversations with the sun and the soil, right? They get chlorophyll, they get access from the soil beneath it in terms of nutrition to water to all of those things, right? So they have their own moments of a very different kind, and they also connect with the other trees, other shrubs and bushes around them. It's not as though they're insulated, they have their connections. What's the role of field immersions? There is plenty. See, amongst any kind of a learning community, there are people who are more kinesthetic in nature, not ones who are oral and visual and all that. I mean, while they are there, some of them would also learn by moving their limbs, by being activated physically, right? So, field based learning would be something that is very enriching for a lot of us. And so we believe that that is something that should be part and parcel of almost all the school, college, and university structures. The second reason is that we only acknowledge people. We don't realize that we are part of a world sharing resources and sharing the world at large. So given these kind of equations, we need to observe where we are, how our position in this world is enabled by the presence of so many species. What is the kind of interconnection that are at work over there and all that.
The experience in the forest was one for a lifetime. Students of the class responded to us with their best memories of Katlekan and how it increased their learning. We spoke to Sanghamitra and Ankita from the climate class about their experiences in Katlekan.
Seeing the Sharavati ecosystem in person fundamentally shifted my understanding of climate change and made me question the development ideals we live by in the current times. Before this, climate change felt very much like an abstract concept, something that we discuss in the classroom about global temperature rise and carbon emissions. But in Sharavati, I saw how climate resilience is actually built on very local ecological systems. And when those systems are altered through deforestation, dam construction, or conservation projects, we're not just changing the landscape, we're actually weakening the natural systems that are in place to regulate climate and sustain biodiversity. And something that will remain close to my heart is when I was standing right in the middle of the rainforest, I could hear the flow of water, calling of birds, and the flow of wind, and also the insects. I could also hear the insects. But I also noticed that near the regulated backwaters, the energy is completely different. Like the river feels quieter, flatter, and less lively. And even though there's no formal acoustic study that has been conducted in this region that I'm aware of, we know from other similar ecological research that habitat alteration changes the soundscape as well.
There are two things that I will never forget about the forest. It's like one, the gushing winds, the sound of the leaves when we entered Katlekan. It is a music to my ears. It is something that we can't experience in cities, in suburbs. The second thing is like, it's the first time in my life I watched an entire constellation in the sky. It is not something that we could see in the city lights. Watching the stars in the sky, the constellations in the open sky, is a memorable factor for me.
The Sharavati Basin reminds us that climate change is not merely a prediction, it is a negotiation happening in real time between ancient ecosystems and modern demands. A forest that has survived continental drift, volcanic upheaval, and millions of years of evolution now depends on decisions made within a single generation. Standing inside Katlekan, the scale of that responsibility becomes impossible to ignore. These rivers are not pipelines, they are histories, climates, and communities braided together. To engineer them without listening to it is to risk erasing systems we barely understand. The Sharavati still flows. The question is not whether we can use it, but whether we can live with it without breaking it.
This story really begs to know, in our rush to power the future, are we accidentally erasing our deepest and crucial past at Katlekan? Speaking of irreversible changes, the Center for Landscapes, Wildlife and Marine Ecology, or CLIME, recently hosted a climate colloquium focusing on the volatile shift in India's rainfall patterns. At the event, Dr. Rajeevan Nair, former Secretary of the Ministry of Earth Sciences, and Mr. Vishwanath Shrikantaya, water conservation expert from Biome Environmental Trust, spoke about the changing climate and its impact. Student journalist Shovanghi had an exclusive conversation with Mr. Nair and Mr. Vishwanath about extreme events and climate mitigation after the colloquium.
So, sir, both of your talks on changing rain patterns, could you just explain how patterns of rainfall has changed over the years and how it has affected flash floods, especially in agricultural areas?
As I told that if we are using observation data, we can clearly see that rainfall pattern is changing, especially daily rainfall pattern and hourly rainfall pattern. So nowadays we are getting more and more rains in a shorter period. So that when it rains in a heavy rains happens in a smaller period, then it leads to flash floods, and that the frequency of such events is increasing substantially over the last 30-40 years now, and mainly attributed to global warming.
Also, you spoke about how it's creating a severe impact on agriculture. What kind of impact does it have on food and food sustainability that we see in the country?
See, any changes in the rainfall pattern will definitely affect the agriculture, unless we don't take it care. They take care by informing farmers before, and first especially sowing dates, and in between if heavy rain happens, it can affect the crop. So such kind of things you should inform them well in advance. Many times it doesn't happen. So any changes in the rainfall pattern can have a serious impact on agriculture, unless we take care of them very well.
Any example of any area that you've seen that has seen such a drastic change in rainfall patterns?
As I told that many places the rainfall is decreasing. For example, Kerala, Chhattisgarh, those areas where the rainfall, mean amount of rainfall is decreasing, seasonal rainfall. And Maharashtra, some parts of northern parts of Canada, rainfall is increasing, Rajasthan or something. So the amount is increasing, that's all different issue. But what is important is the frequency of heavy precipitation. I really reiterate that the importance of heavy precipitation. And when rainfall are occurring in a smaller periods, heavy precipitation, that is really causing serious issue. The mean rainfall changes is not really going to affect.
One thing that I thought about while you were speaking on the dais, what is the impact that wastewater is producing to this entire ecosystem? Is there any impact that you see from wastewater coming from factories and manufacturing industries?
Yeah, so there are two types of wastewater. One is the industrial wastewater, which is really a challenge in terms of setting up effluent treatment plants and managing it. But domestic sewage or domestic wastewater is increasingly seen as a resource. It's not a problem. It is nutrient rich, it is energy rich, and it can be reused appropriately after treatment. Right? So it completes the circularity of water use. And the example that I was giving was of Bangalore City, where a substantial portion of the domestic wastewater will be treated and given to farmers by filling tanks and lakes. Roughly 1.1 million acres will come under cultivation if all the entire wastewater from Bangalore is used. The farmers get water security, and in turn the city gets food security. So what the farmers grow will come back to the city. So that's the sort of modern imagination that we can bring for wastewater.
For our listeners who are not here in the event today, what do you think the government should do, the state should do on this basis, and what are the current policies that you've seen that have really helped in bringing about this reality of what we are talking about here?
So that's, as I told, the adaptation is very important. Climate change is not going to stop for next 30, 40, 50 years. It's going to continue. Probably the intensity may reduce if you really limit the fossil fuel emission. But the climate change is going to happen. And so impacts also will continue to come. So then what we can do is best possible. Of course, mitigation efforts we should do it, but it's a huge problem. All countries should come together. But as far as a state government is concerned, as a local government is concerned, how best we can adapt to these changing climate patterns. So, for example, what he was talking about water conservation, reusing water and giving it to agriculture, and the food is coming back as a circular economy. So we need to move to that circular economy concept. That's very important. So reuse it wherever possible. Resources. The resources are limited and the population is increasing. So the food, water, energy, everything is limited. And with the global warming, that uncertainty in getting energy back, production, for example, is very uncertain. So we need to have some kind of strategy to how to conserve this kind of resources, how to best make use of resources, assuming that population is increasing, need is increasing. And in one household, if we earlier days 200 units we are using it, now we are using 400 units. The same number of people. The energy consumption is increasing now. We use so many other electronic kits, so many washing machine, TV, so many things we are doing it. So the energy consumption per home is increasing. So we need to be very careful.
You spoke about how Karnataka has found this rule of bringing 60 mm of rainfall harvesting, which is something that the government is trying to implement across all housing systems. Do you think such a universal policy across the country can bring about some sort of resource equity in parts of the country that have low rainfall due to changing low rainfall patterns?
So it may not be possible to transfer water from which is saved in Bangalore to, let's say, a Jodhpur or a Jaisalmer, but it's also important that the city develops its own climate action plan, which it is doing. Many cities are developing their own climate action plans, of which rainwater harvesting is one component of the climate action plan. And they are now drilling it down to ward level climate action plans. So many cities are doing that. So therefore, the government is responding and cities are responding to climate change. Within that, rainwater harvesting rules need to be shaped based on the rainfall pattern of that particular city. We must understand what is the distribution of rainfall, what is the intensity of rainfall, what is the total rainfall, and what makes best sense for the rain to be stored or recharged into the aquifers. So city level action plans for rainwater harvesting, which is mandatory now in most cities, can help the city mitigate urban flooding as well as urban water shortage.
So you spoke about how dam management is something that will be a little harder to realize in the current times, given the kind of infrastructure and development that we have. How do you think, is there any feasible solution to bringing about dam management?
So dam management is should be done with a scientific basis. So there's a lot of sciences involved. And for example, India, many dams are there. Most of the dams are not managed using a scientific methods. It's all whims and fancies. For example, I want to open, I will open. But why you should open and what time it should be open is not scientifically calculated. But we should know how much water is coming, how much is water level can go up, and how much water is required down the line. Only in Bakranangal dam, there is a foolproof system. But many other dams are managed very subjectively. And also it depends upon who is giving the authority. I will not tell you the stories. People say the stories. They are not able to open the dam because somebody has not given the permission to open the dam. It was too late when the dam was opened. To some extent, Kerala, to some extent, people say that dam opening was so the dam management. I'll tell you the example of dams in US. Okay, those such dams are huge. There are so many rivers there in US and so many dams. And it is dams are used for producing electricity, giving water for farmers down the line. So beautiful management they can do. They know how much water is coming in, how much water can evaporate, how much water can flow down, and how much water is required for farmers down the line. So it can be easily calculated. This is a good science and technology. We are not making use of it. Still, we are old-fashioned way we are managing dams, which is absolutely absurd. We can satellites, we can send people to Mars, everything, but we cannot manage a dam. Very ridiculous.
Let me just add to what Sir said. One of the other challenges is we have something called a rule curve to manage dams. Right now, the rule curve is a rainfall runoff curve and the current storage of the dam. Right, the rule curves need to be updated based on modern weather predictions, which Dr. Rajeevan was mentioning. More important, many of the dams are interconnected. So we must also manage dams cumulatively, not standalone dams. This is the new challenge for us, and therefore we have to use science to be able to better manage dams, not political whims, but scientific calculations of disaster management.
But as Rajeevan sir says, sometimes political whims walk into the science.
So the difficulty in India is that the stored water in the dam is very, very precious.
Right.
You never know what the rainfall is likely to be and how it's to be used. So there's a trade-off between safety, anticipating a rainfall, and loss of water, and therefore loss of livelihoods and all the economy that goes with it. So we have to be statistically balanced in the judgment that we make, and we must err on the side of precaution of avoiding disasters, because that's where climate change is impacting us.
Also in Kerala, people say that they hesitated to open the dam because they wanted to produce electricity and sell.
Yes.
So Kerala is producing a lot of more electricity and selling it. So they say that if you release water, then so much electricity reduction will happen. And that will ultimately end up with 400 crore or something they estimated. But by retaining the dam, not opening it and opening at the last moment, they cost how much damage? It's more than 20,000 crore.
Exactly.
So it's a trade-off between these two. How best we... It's all... But my point is, suggestion is that it cannot be left to one person. It should be scientifically managed. And there is a good science and technology available now. It's not a rocket science. Isn't it?
Rocket science is easily managed. As you said.
So any lasting words that you would like to tell our listeners about?
Our future is really, there is a lot of uncertainty and we need to be careful. I'm really worried. As I said that I'm not worried about me, but I'm worried about you.
Yes.
Like I reiterate, one of the most wonderful things or bad things about climate change is it impacts those who are the most vulnerable.
Correct.
And so therefore we must make sure that our efforts are there to protect this vulnerable people to the negative impacts. The rich can buy themselves out of climate change, putting more air conditioners, externalizing their environment.
They can ignore climate change.
They can proof themselves against it to a large extent. But the poor can't, and therefore our sense of justice should dominate, which is intergenerational, but also within the current generation. Plus, it should also include biodiversity as part of what we do to mitigate the impacts to the extent possible.
It was an enlightening session that really drove home the point. If we want to secure our future, we have to start by respecting the natural flow of the water that sustains us. This brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to this podcast. As always, stay curious and tune in for more. This episode was hosted by Shinjini Chaturvedi, reportage and interviews by Shovanghi Biswas, edited by Guru Aditya, and illustrated by Vernika. The signature tune was composed by Dr Ananthu. Please write to us and follow us on our social media platforms.